Hello again. Well, we're continuing our discussion here of layers. And let's just go ahead and click on our half circle down here and show you a few things. So in your layers, when this pops up, you've got this solid color gradient and pattern. As landscape photographers, we don't find this very useful, so we pretty much ignore these. What else? So you've got, that was the pattern one. There's a gradient one, which, yeah, to some degree you might find some use for this. But again, typically this is not something we're going to use as a landscape photographer. So we're just going to head ignore these and move on forward. We often will simply click on one of these icons up here to select the layer we want to work with. And we're going to talk about these first four. They are layers that will adjust white balance, contrast, and tone, the lights and darks within an image. So these are very important to us as landscape photographers. I'm going to talk about two of the layers that I don't use, and that will be this brightness and contrast, and I don't use exposure. We'll talk about those first, and then in the next lesson we'll talk about the two that I do use. All of our brightness and contrast and white balance, these things should be we should be dealing with these in Adobe Camera Raw. It's a very intuitive workflow. It's part of the process that we should be doing in Adobe Camera Raw. These adjustments here should be because, oh wow, I want to fine-tune something. I didn't quite get it done properly in Adobe Camera Raw, and I want to just tweak it a little bit here. That's what these are now useful for. All right, so let's go ahead and show you what's going on with brightness and contrast. These are just crude sliders that move the brightness around. Really not a lot of individual control about where you're moving, what part of the histogram you're moving around. It's moving mainly the lighter tones. Notice that darks aren't changing much, but there's just not a lot of control. We can also move our contrast around. If we want to see the histogram and how it's being affected, we can come over here to Window, run down here to Histogram, click on it, and now we have this little histogram that we can see the effect of what we're doing in this histogram. So let's reset this. How do we reset it? We'll come down here to this little circle, or arrow with a circle, click Reset. So here's where it starts off. If I click and drag the slider to the right, I should be opening things up. I won't see the histogram effect until I let go, and yeah, I did move things off to the right. Now the contrast, if I click and drag it off to the right, again, I won't see the effect until I let go. This little button right here, hover over it, it'll tell you what it does. Let me hover over it here just a little bit. It says press to view the previous state. This is what we're seeing to reset, basically start over again. Let's make an adjustment just for fun again, one more time here. And then this eyeball here is the same as this eyeball here. It toggles the adjustment on and off if you want to see what's going on. This other item here, we will show you what's going on in the intermediate section. So let's toggle that eyeball back on. We don't really want this, so we can click on the trash can and click delete. Let's go ahead and talk about this exposure. I never use this. I do know that there are some landscape photographers that find this a useful set of tools. Again, I just don't find this very useful at all. But it just works by dragging these sliders around until you get something that you like, or if you're, well, actually, I'm not sure how they make this work for themselves. We do have some default. We go back to default that way, or we can click this button down here. We can reduce the exposure, or we can increase the exposure here, and we can reset it. We're going to talk about these eyedroppers here when we get into the curves and levels adjustment layers in just a moment in the next lesson. But for here, again, I don't even like the way these work as compared to the other adjustment layers. So we're not even going to kind of get into that here. So that's a quick look at, let's go ahead and throw this layer away, and I prefer to do it that way. So that's a quick look at the brightness and contrast. Again, I don't use it. And it's a quick look at the exposure. Again, I don't use that. All right, we'll take a look at these two that I do use in the next lesson.